Today, we're digging into a pretty heavy strategic forecast, and it steps way outside the usual political noise. It poses a really stark question. What if the end of liberal democracy isn't an ideological choice, but a structural, almost mathematical inevitability? Let's break down how it gets to that conclusion.
Right off the bat, the source hits us with this. The central idea here isn't that democracy gets conquered by some outside force. It's that it just becomes obsolete. It gets too slow, too clunky to handle the sheer speed and complexity of the world we're heading into.
So, why a mathematical certainty? What does that even mean? Well, the analysis suggests this isn't about one particular leader or party taking over. Nope. It's about looking at government as a complex system, and that system is being pushed way past its breaking point by several huge simultaneous pressures. And this is the core of it, right here. It's basic systems theory. When a system is under that much stress, it can either shatter into chaos or it can simplify itself radically to survive. And in this forecast, autocracy isn't a political choice. It's presented as a survival reflex for the state itself. It's the system's way of simplifying to avoid total collapse.
Okay, so let's get into the why. What's causing all this stress? The analysis points to three massive existential pressures that are all hitting at the same time, creating a challenge our current systems were just never built to handle.
So you've got the hard physical limits of our planet pushing in on us. At the same time, we're seeing a return to this brutal, high-stakes competition between global powers. And then you throw in the exponential, almost uncontrollable acceleration of AGI. The argument is that these three things coming together create a perfect storm that slow, debate-focused democracy just can't navigate.
So, if those are the pressures, how does the actual shift from democracy to autocracy happen on a practical level? Well, the source material breaks it down into three key mechanisms of control that it argues are emerging directly from these pressures. The first one is what the source calls the dromological trap. Dromology is just the science of speed. And the idea is simple. The world is now moving too fast for democracy. When crises are unfolding in minutes and hours, you can't wait months for a legislative body to debate a solution. Power just naturally flows away from the slow parts of government to the fast parts. And the result of this speed gap is profound. To keep up, human governance is basically forced to delegate more and more decision-making to incredibly complex, opaque machine learning models. We start to shift from a version of truth based on human consensus to a mathematical, probabilistic truth that's decided by an algorithm, all out of sheer necessity. It becomes an algorocracy. All right, let's move on to the second mechanic. This one isn't driven by the speed of information, but by the hard physical limits of our planet. And this leads to a really critical question the source poses. When things like water, food, and energy become critically scarce, can you really afford to let the free market set the price? When that price makes those essentials inaccessible to most of your population, does it become a national security threat? The forecast argues pretty bluntly that the answer is yes.
So if the market can't be trusted, the analysis says the only logical solution becomes extreme, centrally managed rationing. And this new system of rationing is built on a three-part technological toolkit that, is already well into development around the world.
Let's just look at how these pieces could lock together. A mandatory digital ID, like Europe's eIDS 2.0, ties your real-world identity to everything you do online. You then link that ID to a programmable central bank digital currency. That currency can then be programmed by an algorithm to enforce consumption limits, like a personal carbon quota, right at the checkout counter. Your payment could literally be rejected if you've exceeded your allowance. It's a closed-loop system of automated direct control.
Okay, the third and final mechanic is maybe the most unsettling because it's so subtle. The source argues that those old 20th century visions of dystopia, secret police, physical force, they got it all wrong. Future control isn't about coercion. It's about something much softer: algorithmic seduction.
And here's the real kicker. This system works because we opt into it. We voluntarily trade our privacy and our data for a life that is easier, more convenient, more optimized, and gamified by algorithms. And in that world, dissent isn't crushed. It's neutralized before it can even fully form into a coherent thought, just by nudging our behavior algorithmically. Now, the analysis makes a really key distinction. It says this new autocratic world won't be a monolith. It's not going to look the same everywhere. Instead, it predicts that power will split into two different competing models, one that emerges in the West and another in the East. So on one side, you have the Western model. It's described as a techno-aristocracy, basically a partnership between big tech and the security state. Its power is subtle, hidden inside a black box of algorithms, and its legitimacy comes from being super efficient. Then you have the Eastern model, the extractive oligarchy. Its power is much more direct. It controls the physical resources, the hardware. Its legitimacy comes from nationalism and raw power, and it operates without the bioethical constraints we see in the West.
So this isn't forecasted as a sudden revolution. It's a slow burn. The source actually lays out a specific timeline for how this transition into what it calls a black box state might unfold over the next few decades.
Let's walk through it. It starts right about now, with what it calls the invisible abdication, where we're already delegating critical decisions to algorithms. Then it moves into a critical window, where things like climate emergencies are used to justify the full rollout of digital IDs and CBDCs. From there, the system matures into full psychopolitics, with predictive surveillance. And finally, by 2050, the forecast predicts a great convergence, where the Western and Eastern models start to merge into a single global hybrid system.
But what makes this convergence almost guaranteed? Well, the analysis concludes with this powerful, really unsettling idea it calls the cataconic paradox. It's what kind of locks this future into place.
And there it is. That's the trap. To compete in a high-stakes race against a rival that has no ethical limits on technology, you are forced to adopt the exact same tools of total surveillance and control just to survive. In the process, in trying to defend democracy, you become the very thing you are fighting against. The ethical differences just get erased by the competition. And that brings us to the forecast's final chilling question. If the survival of the state, and maybe even humanity, really depends on creating a perfectly optimized, algorithmically managed system, what happens to human choice? In a world governed by the cold math of survival, is our messy, unpredictable free will a valuable feature, or is it just a dangerous bug that needs to be engineered out of the system?